Hello everyone and welcome to our In Focus BU webinar, Transitions, Learning Opportunities for Everyone. My name is Viki Rozsas and I'm here with you today with my lovely colleague Nikki Edwards. We are BU consultants with Early Childhood Australia. I also like to acknowledge our wonderful team in the background who are enabling and supporting us in this process. As some of you know, BU is a national initiative led by Beyond Blue in partnership with Early Childhood Australia and Headspace and funded by the Australian government. Our aim is to transform Australia's approach to supporting children and young people's mental health in early learning services and schools. And our vision is to that every learning community is positive, is resilient, is inclusive, and is a place where every child, young person, educator, family can achieve their best possible mental health. We are a collaborative learning community. And as you know, if you're registered, if you're part of our community, that means that your early learning service or schools has access to all our resources and a BU consultant. If you're not registered yet, feel free to register today. We're going to put the registration link in our chat. Now, before we start, I would like to hand over to you, Nikki, to acknowledge country.
Thank you for that welcome, Viki. Yeah, I'd like to make an acknowledgement of the country that we're meeting on today. So I'm Wiradjuri born, and I actually live and play on Kaurna land, which is in Adelaide. But currently I'm meeting with you today from Wurundjeri country, the land of the Kulin people. Oh, sorry, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. There you go, me making a small error there because this country is new to me, and to think about it that way. It's really important that we not just make acknowledgement of country, but we can make direct links to wellbeing for people around the country to do with the fact that there is a lot of healing necessary and that BU can actually support us to make acts of reconciliation to work towards creating that healing space for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families, which will create a healing space for all of us. So it's really important that we have an ability to create a sacred space to actually look at non-traditional pedagogies alongside traditional long-standing cultural pedagogies that we have available to us in this country. So it's today very, very much making acknowledgement of country and linking it to the topic today is that the country has gone through repeated historical transitions that have been quite damaging and continuing today. So if we step up and take responsibility for that, we can make use of BU to actually make acts of reconciliation on a daily basis. So, and that's what I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to today.
Thank you, Nikki. And when I listen to you, I really think about reconciliation as not just a professional practice, but also a personal practice. And I think our framework promoting mental health and well-being really is based on both personal and professional practices and how these interconnect and integrated. And a really foundational aspect of that is self-care. So on our next slide, when we think about self-care, there are obviously complexities around that. Keywords to do with self-care that we need to consider and reflect on is cultural safety, as you mentioned, Nikki, support and strength-based, because ultimately we all learn in so many ways, but without a sense of safety and without self-care, it is very difficult to engage in meaningful learning. So when we think about self-care, that means that we are safe to be who we are, and we also encourage others to be safe who they are. We're able to work with our strengths and encourage others to promote their strengths as well. We're able to express our opinions and beliefs, and very importantly, we feel as respected and we feel valued and heard. When you think about self-care, I would like you to think about the intentional teaching of modeling and how children will experience you engaging in self-care, and what children will learn through watching you in self-care experiences. So we will be asking you to interact today and contribute during our webinar. There will be plenty of opportunities for you to reflect on your own practices through polls and reflective questions as well. So feel free to contribute, and please contribute only if you feel comfortable and if you feel okay about it. We're going to talk about mental health and self-care, and I'd like to acknowledge that at times difficult emotions might come up. So I'd like you to really look after yourself and make sure that you support others around you to engage in self-care practices as well. If something feels uncomfortable to you, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14. And if you experience difficulties, please phone 1-800 136 402, our customer care. Now, before we launch into this topic, I'd like to just highlight a couple of technical tips to maximize your online learning today, to navigate the online space. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the webinar platform, this is what your screen will typically look like. Yeah, on the left, the control panel on the right. Throughout the webinar, you can ask questions using the webinar function, and we will have technical support available. The responses in green are public responses, one in red are private responses, and the control panel with the question box is highlighted in blue. You can use your control panel to manage your phone or computer audio. Feel free to change your audio settings if you're experiencing audio challenges. Today, everybody's placed on listen only mode. Your microphones have been muted as we have a large number of attendees. If you're experiencing any other difficulties at any time, please note that the customer care details on the screen, and feel free to contact our team directly. As I mentioned, you can ask questions via the question box. We will be inviting you to participate in polls, and we really are curious to find out your views and perspectives on different things. So I really encourage you all to actively participate in polls that we will be launching throughout the session. We're also making public the attendee list for you, and we will be posting links to resources and handouts for you to copy if you are interested. All event participants will be able to access a certificate of participation and a recording of this webinar. Now let's think about what you would like to get out of this session, and I'd like to encourage you to take a mental note about what you hope to find out, setting an intention for this session. Nikki, let's have a look at today's focus.
Thanks, Viki. I love that concept, setting an intention. It's beautiful. It's like we always want to be purposeful, don't we? But sometimes purposeful sounds dull, whereas intentional sounds like it's something that's going to engage our whole self. So I really love that statement. So today's focus, the things that we want to discuss with you today are around these 3 key points that are on the slide. We recognise that transitions play a part in everybody's lives, so they are in fact inevitable. But we want to think about them very much from a positive and protective lens. So we're reminded that often we use different terms to talk about transitions. So you might be, thinking transitions, and that could be limited. But what we want to do is open up our thinking to remind ourselves that transitions are change, movement, growth. They can be around ritual and routine, but there are lots of transitions that occur every day for us as human beings, both big and little. Therefore, we need to actually recognise the importance of them and make the link to our mental health and our well-being, because, as we've said, they're inevitable. They're happening to us all the time. What is our perspective on them? How do we approach them? And as Viki said before, how do we role model approaching them in a positive sense? Not just for children that we work with, but also for ourselves, for our families, for the community. Like, how can we do that bigger picture thinking around transitions? which leads on to the final point, which is about empowering for transition. So thinking about them as a tool that we can actually make use of to make our lives better, to make our lives have that mental health balance. Through thinking about it in that way. So let's hope that that's actually the focus that we create for you today, and that we can get through the content of thinking about those things. Vicky's going to give us an overview of what, what actually, a deeper overview of what transitions are.
And I really love, Nikki, that you mentioned transformation, because I think transitions, change and transformation are so intertwined and so connected. And as you know, we see transitions everywhere around us. If you think about nature, for example, being outdoors, you might see the autumn leaves transitioning into different color, change the movement of the clouds or the color of the sky. Transitions are absolutely everywhere and they're very integral to our lives. So it really is inevitable in everyone's lives. And also, I think, and I propose that transitions are necessary building blocks for our growth. It really enables us to engage in new learning, to embrace new identities. So transitions are all about change and represent a movement and the change. Sometimes they also refer to as the space between an ending and the new beginning. And I know, Nikki, we had a conversation about that space between, and we're going to expand on that later today. But clearly they play a significant part in our lives, and in children's lives and in families' lives, all throughout our lives. So we know that changes can be sometimes really easy, and at times they can be really stressful, and some changes are indeed tough, depending on the degree. So we always need to adapt to new circumstances, and of course, the greater degree of change, the more difficulties we can face at times. So changes and transitions influence us and the way we think and the way we act in our lives. And the more we are able to develop healthy dispositions to engage in transitions in early life, the better equipped we are when we are older to embrace change, and indeed engage with changes effectively. We use our previous experiences and knowledge, and are able to sometimes make predictions about change. Having said that, I'm sure we all understand and recognize that some changes are predictable and some are unpredictable. So it is really important when we think about transitions to acknowledge that everyone has transitions. How we deal with transitions relates to our prior experiences, and transitions indeed influence our mental health, and our well-being. So when we deeper unpack the role of transitions play in everyone's lives on our next slide, we can really think about finding times where we can really build a feeling of being welcomed, being wanted, being needed, being loved. And I think in early childhood, when we engage with young children, it is about finding those moments that will support and enable and facilitate children's transition. So a sense of intention, once again, is really important. And the role transitions play in everyone's lives obviously can be transformative, a very significant and powerful transitions in all human beings' life. The moment of birth, when someone is suddenly from being one with the mother now pushed into the world and engaging in the world in a very different way. So it's a physical adjustment, it's a psychological adjustment, an emotional adjustment. So we have established transitions are a period where we must need to adapt to new circumstances, need to adapt to different expectations, to different people, being with the same people in different ways, change environments, for example. And when we break it down further, I'd like to just quickly mention a couple of points about young children's transitions. And we think about young children's transitions, we know that in young children's daily engagement in an early learning service, there are numerous transitions. There are the arrival time, there are moving from an experience to a different experience, moving up to a different room into a new group of children, um, moving to lunch or rest time, or indeed arrive at home after departing from the early learning service. So I think it's really important, Nikki, just to think about how transitions influence very young children and the way they feel about themselves. And I'd like to invite you through our first poll to really think about your experience as a young child. Think about transitions you experienced when you were young and think about were there positive experiences? Let's have a look at this poll. It's really interesting, Nikki, when we reflect on our own childhood, what kind of experiences seem to come up.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And as we've been really clear about, obviously those experience over time, they culminate in us having a state of mind in regard to transitions, in regard to, how we feel about them and how they make us feel. So, and we can all be different. And obviously we can all be different in our response to different types of transitions, but we do tend to, come up with a way of being around those things. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what the poll results are.
Yes, indeed. So some of you think that transitions were positive experiences. 29% of you, so 1/3, believe that they were positive experiences, and some of you, about 10%, no. And sometimes we are unsure when we reflect on early experiences. It's very natural to just not being sure of the context and what the experience was. Thank you so much for that. It's wonderful to see your reflections and your willingness to engage. That's great. Now, when I think about my transition, I think I really like to create those spaces, Nikki, between the things. For example, when I transition home from work, I really enjoy spending a little bit of time outdoors with my dog and just create that space in between that will enable me to process whatever's been happening and transition into the new space.
This is
When we
true.
think about, yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I'm the same. I think I was speaking with you about this before. If we think about it as our state of mind, I'm actually somebody who really thrives in transition. I really like to be in that state of flux. I like change, so I really respond in a certain way to that. But I know that that's not the experience for everybody. But I definitely feel that sense of needing to create different spaces. So in fact, that's how I do on a transition, is actually by building more of it in, creating more of a space between. So I don't have as much of that feeling of needing to be, to move through. But yeah.
Let's have a look at our next poll. So I'm going to ask you, everyone, what do you think is the most important during transitions for yourself and also for children? Let's think about multiple perspectives. Some of you might think that a calm environment is really, really important, or interactions and relationships.
Yeah.
And certainly earlier today, we talked about the importance of feeling connected to each other and creating that context where a warm relationship and responsiveness can emerge.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because the response will be different. You'll see there on the poll it asks for yourself as an adult, and then it asks also for yourself, in regard to how you feel about children's experience. So they could be two different
Mm.
things, really, in essence. So
Mm. And ultimately, I like the way you talked about the space in between, because I think that really points to the fact that we obviously all have transitions, but we have so many transitions. And sometimes when we really slow down and shine our awareness to whatever is happening around us, we're really able to see those transitions more clearly.
Absolutely. Well, there you go.
And the feeling of safe and secure, absolutely. That safety that we started our webinar with, I agree, is really fundamentally important, and in interactions and relationships. And interesting, no one thought that getting it over and done with and moving on is really important, which is great. Great
It
to
is
see.
good. It's a startling and obviously quite distinct response that we literally have 0 participants giving that answer. But I'll have to fess up to certainly being somebody who's been in transition times and much felt like I was surviving them, as opposed to experiencing them. And that's when you want that reflective practice to kick in, and say, why is this happening? Why am I experiencing in this way? How is, the children also? But we will bring that up as we move into the next
Yes.
part of the session today.
And indeed, Nikki, transitions are always opportunities for us to learn through reflection. So some of our transitions are negative, and some of the transitions are very positive. But ultimately, it comes down to how we approach them and how open we are to learn from them and engage in new transitions in different ways.
Absolutely. We've been you'll see popped into the chat is the reflective questions that we're really encouraging you to take up today and take back to your place, whether that's your professional place or your personal place, to have a deeper conversation, or just to think about the implications for life through that. So the next slide is we're ready for the next slide, where we will talk about the impacts of transition on mental health and well-being. That's most certainly connected and related. The link is really clear. If even just the fact of the volume of them, if nothing else, the fact that so much of our life is spent in that space. But they're also really important because they're about community. So they are about the fact that the way that a child is experiencing will impact other children and adults, and the way that an adult is experiencing or modeling will impact children. So it's all those beliefs and patterns that come into play, is that we then become people who respond in certain ways. We have that pattern of how we approach it, and what we want to help this generation of children to create is a positive pattern that they can bring.
Mm.
It happened before, and I came through it, and I learned so much, and I've grown, and so I can do that again next time, or I can draw on that again next time. Or actually, I thought I was nervous about it in the beginning, but then I embraced it. I got some help that I needed, and then I stepped into the next new learning or the new space. So thinking about that sort of thing is really important. We want that growth mindset. We want people to be optimistic and hopeful about what the future through transition brings. So, and which relates to what you said in the beginning, Viki, about the fact that it is a place for growth and for transformation, and being able to do something new you couldn't do before.
Mm.
I
Mm.
always talk to my own children about the concepts around growth mindset, and that's also that idea of I can do it. I can do hard things. If it is a hard thing, if the transition is a hard thing, and I know I'll come out of that stronger and more resilient. So that is the biggest impact, is that if we have a positive experience of transition, we're able to take that into all those other places that we go to. We're able to teach other people about it too. Children are such powerful teachers for us as adults, but also for their peers, to say this can be okay. We can do this. We can do something new or different, or in a different way. So I think this is really important. We'd like to get your feedback on through a poll now, in regard to what you think the characteristics of positive transitions actually are. So the question is asking what do you actually think is true of what happens at your place?
And I think this is a really, really interesting question. which things are true of the transitions at your place, and thinking about the importance of interaction and relationships and collaboration, really lifting children's agency and seeing transitions as a joint experience, as something that we do together. We're going to work with children, we're not going to do it for them. Organize, some of you might think that it needs to be organized and facilitated by educators. Some of you might think that it could be a barrier at times to children's uninterrupted play. Some of you might think that transitions are times for children to learn about expectations and group expectations. And some of you might think that these are opportunities to actively involve children. And I really liked when Nikki talked about engaging in transitions. And I just wanted to mention the importance of promoting social emotional competencies when we engage in transition. So once again, just thinking about our intentional teaching to foster teamwork, for example, during transition, to foster empathy, to help someone, to appreciate someone else's perspective during transitions.
That's lovely. It's all that transparency, isn't it, around our intentional teaching. Here's our summary, our results.
And lots of you think that collaboration is important, and we value that, and this is great. And the last point, opportunities to actively involving children, is very much in line with that. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
We've got our content that's coming further up into the webinar today, so it's great that we're all sitting in a similar headspace in regard to this.
Yes. So when we think about why transitions are so important, I'd like to share a couple of points, and Nikki, we talked about this, and this is the inner and the outer transitions. So very often, and of course these are entwined, the inner shifts that occur in us contribute to changes, to outer changes, and these are very, very closely connected. For example, if you think about an example in nature, when the fruit is ripe, it's going to fall from the tree. So that inner transition, our readiness to see things, to learn from things, is really fundamental in us growing new competencies and growing new skills as educators, and also recognizing that in children. So there is always a time that when the time is ripe, when the student is ready, the master will appear. So it really is important to understand the importance of inner transitions and creating the context that which can be facilitated. So for children, little transitions, there are so many transitions, as we mentioned earlier, little transitions can be really significant. And we need to think about multiple perspectives, and the perspective of the child in this case. And if I'm a very young child, maybe 2 years old, I might experience transitioning into an early learning service very differently to what an adult would experience. So understanding that these are little things are very, very important. And ultimately, when we think about mental health promotion and wellbeing promotion, we need to be thinking about those little practical examples and practices that we can promote in our daily practice, integrate them into our daily practice. So it's very important for children to have positive experiences and change in the early years. And we know that has implications on neurodevelopment. We know that neurons that fire together wire together. So the more we are able to promote positive experiences during children's transitions, the more they will able to learn and develop a positive dispositions towards transitions later in life. So thinking about transitions in environment, transitions, think in terms of experiences and activities, transitions during play, if someone joins a play experience or someone leaves a play experience, all those little things can be very, very significant for young children. I also like to acknowledge the multisensory nature of children's experience, especially very young children, Nikki. I know you really are passionate about the birth to three age group and promoting really meaningful and respectful practices for very young children. And I think it's important for us to think about those multisensory experiences that can occur during transitions for very young children.
Mm. Yeah, you're right. Because it's such a message of respect and trust, isn't it, that we can give young children. So obviously that poll result showed that we've got a really big group of people here today who see that children need that sense of choice and agency. They need to be
Mhm.
actively involved in decisions that are made for them. Um, that and we understand that through our early learning lens that actually um, that but for some of us as adults, that can be a difficult thing to pass over, which sort of leads us into the next slide that we have around thinking about educators and transitions, because obviously we're very integral to what's occurring in a service. And we also want you today, as we said before, to open up your eyes and your mind to think about your life, who you are as an individual as well. So what your experience of transition is like, and that's why we're going that way. But really, the point I wanted to make today was to think about, obviously how we think about transitions, how we transition ourselves. So that might be from our professional space into our personal space, but also how we model that as well, which we've talked about. So as an example, mindfulness is, a big popular concept to be thinking and talking about. And Viki and I both have a really strong connection to that ourselves personally, thinking about being present, and everyday practice of mindfulness. So we're certainly supportive of that coming into the early learning space. But sometimes what you want to do as an educator is to understand it yourself. Make use of it yourself, and not pour from an empty cup. If you could use that analogy around understanding how it feels. We can't really teach what we don't understand. So if we can think about, being what it means to be present in a transition, and being mindful in a transition, and how that actually looks in our day to day, being mindful of ourselves as well. Like, how
Mm.
do I transition well? What are the tools that I can bring to the children that I work with around how I do it for myself? What connects to what I'm doing myself.
And I'm really glad, Nikki, you mentioned the word practice because I think when I think about transitions, it is exactly that. It is a practice. We can't aim for perfect transitions. It's always the learning process over product, making sure that we're
Absolutely.
able to embrace transitions, whether are labeled as positive or negative. We look for the learning opportunity in them in line with the growth
Absolutely.
mindset. And in that process, Nikki and I, we had a conversation about the importance of kindness. So when we engage in reflective practice, it's really important that we're kind to ourselves and we look at effective practices and how to promote them instead of beating ourselves up for making a mistake. It's really
Yeah.
important to bring that sense of kindness into the picture as well.
Absolutely. And that relates to the next slide that we've got. If you Thank you, team. If we think about that idea of finding the joy in change and the opportunity in change, so exactly as you said, sometimes we think transition means an ending, and sometimes it does mean an ending. Great example is packing up. The bane of so many children's existence is the we must pack up, but actually we all know that it's a really important practice. It's actually a respectful practice. It means that
Mm.
we're taking care of what we have. It means we know where it is when we want it tomorrow. It means that in some space, it means that the cleaners can do their job so that they can actually clean up the space, well, or whoever is in charge of doing the cleaning, which sounds so practical, but is actually the sorts of things that we can be really transparent with for children. We can actually share that with them, not feel like we're tricking them into a transition that they don't have choice, and they can't be involved. So, and that's because, as we said before, we respond differently. Some of us are really keen on change. We're ready for the next thing. Some of us want to, stay steady, and have something really familiar, and that makes us comfortable. And a lot of us sit in the middle. So, it's
Mm.
thinking about how we can enact those things in our work, absolutely. So but because actually transition can often be experienced as grief and loss, and that's actually a reality, and that's why it's linked so closely with our mental health experience. So what we want to do is create that protective factor where the words that are related to transition are not grief and loss, but or we are acknowledging the grief and loss, we're taking that seriously, especially for young children. But we're thinking of transitions as being opportunities, being about optimism and hope, possibility, challenge, and that stretching ourselves idea, doing something differently from how we did it yesterday, if we have the capacity, or even testing our capacity and it not quite working out, that actually that's not an unsuccessful transition necessarily. So at this point, Viki, we were going to pop a poll in. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We were going to pop a poll in, but we might leave that poll and see how we're traveling for time into the future.
I was just going to very quickly share an example about responding to transitions. I spoke with a service, and they had a little kindergarten age child who had a single mother, and the child and the mother was quite reluctant and anxious about moving off to school. So what they did is that the mother and the educator got together, and they created a joint vision and included the child in the decision making, and identify strategies together to support the child to move to school. And I think that's a really important point to make, the power of collaboration and the power of being seen in the decision making process for young children, for families, and for educators to acknowledge the power of that is really, really important.
Absolutely, I agree. It makes
So,
what could be, it doesn't avoid the transition, it just makes the transition as good as it can possibly be.
absolutely. And it certainly has huge influence on social emotional competencies and learning. When we think about our BU professional learning modules, our FIR module in particular, we talk a lot about caring for others, making responsible decisions, and really focusing on positive relationships that will support children's agency and children's social emotional competencies. So when we think about very young children, the birth to 3, transitions really, and all children indeed, transition need to be positive, as you said, Nikki, so children can learn about themselves and can see themselves as capable beings, feel good about themselves, and can learn about engaging and interacting with others, learn about how to manage their feelings, etc. And in the transitions, of course, we talk a lot about co-regulating, and educators being co-regulators for very young children. So once again, the importance of understanding our own emotional landscape and understanding how we can best be present with young children and remain calm to support children's emotions and emotional regulation during transitions. Let's have a look at our next poll. What positive qualities do transitions do in your day? What positive qualities do transitions in your day have? Sometimes transitions can be viewed as providing calmness, responsiveness, flexibility, choice.
We spoke about this morning, didn't we, Viki? I was saying, obviously these are optimum words that are here on the slide that you're choosing in your poll today. And as you see, it says select all that apply, so you can choose them all. But obviously not all transitions have these qualities or characteristics every time, and these are not necessarily, it doesn't make your transition an unsuccessful one. And my example is, I have plenty of transitions in my daily life, in my personal life, that are not always calm. Sometimes they can be really exuberant and quite loud, and that is not an indicator of a transition not being successful. So once again, like so many things, it's about intention and responsiveness to the experience of those involved in the transition. So it'll be interesting to see what the results are.
And indeed, transitions can be experienced differently by different people. So if a transition is successful for someone, it doesn't mean it's successful for someone else.
I know. There's so much for us to think about, isn't there?
I love the complexities of all this.
Yes.
So
So
preparedness.
interestingly, preparedness. Yeah. Which we have spoken about too, Viki, haven't we? The knowing what's happening, being able to predict, somebody helping you name to tame what's occurring, or
Mhm.
to be able to predict the future, what might happen next, is obviously a really important quality, and obviously is actually happening out there. It's happening out there in the early learning space. So that's exciting.
And the naming to tame, the naming initiative is certainly a very effective practice in supporting transitions.
Absolutely.
Let's have a look at our next slide.
I think we've talked about this in the previous slide, so we might move on actually to the slide following this one. We probably have discussed this as well, Viki, but this is your forum.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this slide really is about engaging with the experience instead of clinging to a predetermined outcome. And I think, Nikki, we mentioned the importance of intention and setting intention, but also flexibility and responsiveness, which is really fundamental to social emotional competency, to understanding the complexities and the many factors that influence transitions and being ready to go along with whatever change or need occurs. We can definitely adjust our strategy. So ultimately, when you think about the change process, change at the individual level is a process whereby individuals can alter their ways of thinking and doing. Educators and families, we can certainly intentionally work on that, and we can certainly engage children and model that to children.
Absolutely.
So we have talked a great deal about what transitions should be. So thinking about social and emotional learning at the heart of transitions is really, really important. Promoting a sense of belonging and connectedness. And I think when you think about the early years learning framework, the belonging, being, and becoming, sometimes we can be focused on the becoming. And I think I would like to really uh, position belonging and being as absolutely fundamental in this process as well, that enables connection. We can only connect in the present moment. We can't connect in 5 minutes time. So really knowing the child, knowing the family, utilizing connections with the child and the family to support transitions, being inclusive, and that means that we need to be really aware of our bias at times. So thinking about different learning styles, thinking about different temperaments, thinking about the impact on environments, and definitely making it flexible and fun and engaging and supportive for everyone.
I agree.
So when we think about positive transitions, what do they look like? What do they feel like? What do they sound like for children, for families, and for educators? Really thinking about relationships rather than focusing on a procedure. And I really like, Nikki, your thinking about focusing on the learning, and it doesn't matter if a transition is not perfect. We certainly can use it and learn from it. Different frameworks can support us in our reflections. For example, the Australian Early Development Census, AEDC. Many of you know that the 2018 findings are now available. And I'd just like to encourage you, if you haven't done it so, to really engage with this document and look at the social competence and emotional maturity domain and how you can support your practices in the service using this information. So I guess when we think about transitions, we talked a little bit about behavior and feelings of children, but I think organizing children's feelings is a really important part. And as you know, on our BU website, we have numerous resources, including the Circle of Security, that will support you in your further engagement in this. Opportunities for connection and developing and maintaining the respectful, responsive relationships, providing routines that will support social emotional development. That's almost like a rhythm to the day that enables children to predict what's coming up next, and communicating the routines, of course, to children that is easily accessible to them, for example, through visual picture books. We talked about the importance of safety and being sensitive and responsive to children. Transitions and educators personally and professionally. And to lead into our next slide, I'd just like to quickly mention a quick example that I shared with Nikki. During my travels and holiday experience overseas, we caught a Shinkansen from Tokyo to Nagoya, and we bought the tickets in the last minute, and we were really flustered and didn't know, quite stressed actually, didn't know which platform to go to. And the very kind interpreter and guide came up to us, and she walked us to the platform, and we boarded the train, and the train left within 30 seconds of boarding. And that experience really highlighted for me the importance of creating a responsive context. So that person very clearly picked up our emotional situation, tuned in, and understood that the best way to promote these people's transition to the bullet train in this case was to remain calm, to give clear instructions, to smile, display positive affect, and indeed to engage us in a conversation on our way. And it was a very a calming experience after all. I just thought I shared that with you all.
I think the point you made when we were sharing that story before was also the fact that following that, when you'd actually, made your way to your destination, you actually had a completely different experience of your day and of the time. Like, it actually changed you in how you had been feeling. Because prior to that, and sorry, correct me if I'm wrong with the story, but you had sort of been, this is not good, which makes this not good, which makes this whole experience of this day has just been. And then you met this one person who changed your whole perspective. So you came away going, this is the best place on earth. We'll come back here all the
Absolutely.
time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes,
So
yes,
it
Nikki.
was had these, on flowing effects, didn't it? Which is, I think that story is, I think it's beautiful that you had that experience of that story, and that person that you met probably has no idea the impact that they had, but it is a beautiful it's a beautiful analogy story to what we're seeking to create, isn't it? That
Power of
experience.
interactions, power of
Yeah.
relationships, indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing is, we do keep talking about the adults in the equation, but that's because we're really clear on the fact that, the adults' experience and the adults, the impact that the adults have on interactions and on the environment, is paramount. We know it has, it is actually the most important thing that's occurring. So that's where we want to think about the fact that personally we could have a different response than we do professionally, and that would be appropriate and a fine thing, but we want to be able to be reflective, that know thyself, know how you are and why,
Yes.
so that you can actually bring that into your work. We have some really strong wellbeing resources for educators that we can bring that exist in BU, so because we're very much focused on the fact that we need to keep the mental health of people who work with children and families well. We want to be able to create tools and strategies to seek help and to get the help that you need, and once again to model for children that you can seek help, that not all transitions are positive, and that mistakes are made, and that we can work through that. And my my example of this is in my previous work, I worked as an early childhood consultant, and I would go into early learning services to talk with them about pedagogy and practice. And I went to a service one day and they were telling me about sleep time, and they were saying it's just a disaster. From about 10 o'clock, all of the educators get a pit of dread in their stomach about the 11 o'clock sleep time. And I said, well, why are you persisting with it? And why haven't you applied a reflective practice activity to working out, you know, what you could do differently and what you could change? And they said, well, the thing that we can't change is the fact that at 11 o'clock, sleep time starts, and by 11:15 to 11:30, all the children must be asleep. And I said, who decided this? Like, where is this written? And they said, well, it's on our schedule on the wall. So we must adhere to this schedule, even though it's a disaster and we feel like we're just constantly surviving sleep time every day, which, you know, sleep time is a perfect example, or rest and relaxation time, whatever it looks like. This is an example of that. So, you know, applying the reflective practice around, you know, how would we like this transition to be? What's getting in the way of us being able to have the transition that we're planning for? And how can we undo the shackles of, you know, we must adhere to this schedule, even though it doesn't work for us or for the children. So.
This is such a great example, Nikki. And I think when we think about intentionally promoting protective factors to reduce the impact of risk factors and promoting really positive, engaging relationship with children, yet we find times during our day in our work with young children where we completely forget about the relationships and we focus on a paper on the wall and adhering to different rules and that not necessarily support our way of working and our philosophy and our engagement. So I think questioning is a wonderful practice and reflective practice. Continuing to question, is this in line with what I deeply care about? Is this in line what I'm really passionate about to promote children's learning, development and well-being in an early learning service? Absolutely. And I guess the risk and protective factors is a very significant part and resource in our BU framework. So I really encourage you all, if you haven't had a chance to look at this, have a look. There are numerous related resources that are extremely helpful in promoting children's mental health and well-being.
Beautiful.
So ultimately, when we think about strategies, what can we do to support transitions in terms of planning, in terms of communication, flexibility?
And we have, you know, this is, I guess, a summation of all the things that we've talked about in this webinar, is that you can plan. You can absolutely plan for transitions. They can, you know, become part of your children's programs. They can become part of your life and your rituals around how you transition yourself. You can be thinking optimistically and have that sense of optimism. Communication and being transparent about what transitions are and the purpose of them and the intention, and the fact that they're everywhere. Being inclusive of everybody's experience around those transitions, responsive and flexible, as we've talked about, and having that critical reflection, constant critical reflection on how things are, you know, traveling and how things are going. So my point is always check your intention. You know, if you're not sure, check your intention. If you've got a transition that's occurring and you're not sure if it fits with your philosophy, or if it's actually a benefit and a risk, a protective factor and positive, check your intention. And the words that I use for myself, and I use these as a mother actually more than anything, is that idea of honoring that space between, you know, am I honoring the fact that we're spending so much time in that space? How do I honor it?
That's lovely. And that space between is the birthplace for growth, Nikki. So it is really lovely to acknowledge that, you know, as adults, as educators, we can do a lot to support other people's transitions, children's transitions, by tuning in, by being responsive, by being flexible. Definitely we can have a huge influence on our colleagues, and to promote positive cultures, as you mentioned, Nikki, communication, respect. Those non-verbals are so important, isn't it, in that process, the body language, etc. But most importantly, understanding the importance of continuously building our own awareness of ourself, engage in self-care practices, and if we need help, reach out and call out and contact someone we trust, and have a conversation, because we know conversations have healing effects and they're very, very important in the learning as well.
Which does relate to the always be you symbol on the next slide. So you'd be familiar at the beginning of the session, there was a link placed in the chat around the resources that we have in BU that are called Always Be You. So this is an example of one of the symbols that we use, and it is drawing on Aboriginal pedagogy and Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing. So it is, by the very fact of using it in our work, we are, being part of that idea of creating that healing, of honouring and respecting the fact that there is a long, long line of pedagogy that exists in this country, and it's deep within the land. So it's thinking about, you'll see this symbol is, it'll resonate with you and land with you with different people, but the keywords for this are that idea of planning, exploring, problem solving. So as Viki so beautifully said, conversation is what yarning, whatever that looks like, and it doesn't always have to be verbal, but that interaction around, discussing these concepts that you've thought and heard about today, and the polls that you've responded to, and reflecting on whether you consider, this transition to be a precious space, a blessed space that actually is worthy of actually our planning time, our time to create something that builds that positive and protective space for well-being, that we're really considerate of it. So as I said, these are called Always Be You. They're in the BU initiative, and they're a really strong part of how we work in our mentoring and consulting with services, to support them to develop different ways of thinking. So it's about opening up our mind to be able to see it from a different perspective, to consider something we haven't before. So it very much sits with that, transition, transformation, connection that Viki so beautifully made today.
Another resource that you might find very helpful in the BU resource portal is 7 ways to build educator resilience. Most of the services I work with really appreciate this, and it gives you just further reflective points to explore with your team. And as Nikki, you mentioned, I'd like you to return to our initial point of setting an intention and reflecting on what will you take away from today. It was a very quick hour, but I'd like to encourage you to make a note. What have you thought about today during this webinar? What made you wonder? What are the kinds of things that you're planning to change or tweak or indeed implement in your daily practice with young children, families and colleagues? And ultimately, how will you engage others, your colleagues in your team, to think further about transitions and how to make transitions meaningful, responsive, and flexible for children. Thank you very much.
Avenues as well. Sorry, Viki. We have a host of avenues as well for you to be able to share this with someone. So if you're a registered service, you can absolutely have a conversation with your consultant, or come along to one of our national check-in events where you can have a conversation with another service around their experience with transitions, or their experience with the Always Be You symbols, that idea of transformation, stepping out and stretching your capacities, and seeing what the opportunities are when you do actually step into the space of transition as that beautiful space between.
We would like to thank you so much for participating today. I really enjoyed the conversation, and very much appreciate the opportunity to think and learn with you. When you exit, you will be prompted to complete the exit survey. We would really appreciate if you could complete this. We always like to learn and further develop our webinars, and this is very important for us to reflect on. As many of you know, these webinars are really wonderful ways not only to learn and reflect, but put learning into action. And they also assist in demonstrating our individual commitment to continued professional development with BU. If your service isn't registered or school isn't registered yet, I really would like to encourage you to register this afternoon. If you'd like to know more about what is involved, check out how to start our experience and join today. There are numerous other online events that we really encourage you to join. These are the national check-ins on various very interesting topics, or our essential session as well. Once again, thank you so much for joining with us today, and we look forward to seeing you online again. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, behind the scene team.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Lovely.